All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Berg with the Ann Arbor District Library. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Literati for our partnering with us on this event. I'm sure you all saw their table as you entered, where you can get copies of the book. If you didn't get one, they will be there through the rest of the duration of the event, so you can always pick one up there. I am here to introduce a conversation with, hopefully I pronounce it correctly, Duri Aziz Amna and Julie Bunton. They will be, first we are going to get a reading from Duri, and then they will have a little bit of a conversation, discussing the book. Following that, there will be time for questions from the audience, and then at the end of the night, we will do, we'll have a book signing. You can get your book signed if you want. I think you all probably know who this person is, but I'll go over quickly. Aziz Amna is from Pakistan and now lives in New Jersey. She graduated from Yale and the Helen Zell Writers Program at U of M. She's written for, the New York Times as well, and this is her debut novel. So I will pass it over to you guys now. Thank you for coming.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, I think you can. Should I just
go for it?
Okay, cool. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to Literati and the District Library for hosting, and thank you most of all to Julie, who obviously, as everyone knows here, is a brilliant writer herself, of Marlena, and also is my beloved teacher, so this is such an honor to be here. Okay. So this is from American Fever. Because fiction readings are very hard, I'm just going to do a very short one from the very beginning of the novel. And for context, I feel like there's a few people here who've already read parts of the book, but it's the story of a young 16-year-old Pakistani who moves from urban Pakistan to a very rural part of Oregon for a year-long exchange program. And I think that's all you need to know. Okay. January. By God, I had planned to keep it to myself and God. But then the sheets speckled red. Blood, like pomegranate jewels, spots the pillowcase. It's the night of Kelly's wedding. The Pacific Northwest has received a flurry of snow, and as I get out of bed to gargle away the metal from my mouth, I wonder how the drops of red will look on the pristine white of the patio. I wonder if the blood means the disease is now severe, even lethal. Mostly, I wonder how much of this is America's doing. In the morning, I go out to the living room where Kelly and Ethan are nursing their coffees, clearly hungover. I tell Kelly she has to take me to the doctor. She still has mascara on from last night. Can this wait, Hira? I shake my head, tell her it must be today, and my host mother's face sets into annoyance, which is doubly unfortunate because she and I shared a tender moment last night, the kind of thing that has become a rarity of late. This must not be how she and Ethan plan to spend the first morning of their marriage, but I can't drive, and she is the adult in charge, so this is how it has to be. In the car ride to the doctor's, I try to make conversation, telling her I had a great time attending my first American wedding. Kelly loves it when I posit myself as a virgin to America, so that cheers her up a bit. I also mentioned that I spoke with Ali on the phone after the party. So, are you two dating now? He lives in New York. I'm going back to Pakistan in 5 months. Yes, but life is long, she says. And you're smart. I'll be shocked if you don't find your way back to America. You're assuming I want to. See, that's my problem. Kelly's doing me a favor by driving me around the day after her wedding. Why can't I keep my mouth shut? Well, she says, frowning, they do say it's the land of opportunity. Kelly lives in rural Oregon, where the state of opportunity is such that I haven't been able to find an after-school job in 5 months. But it's 2011, America is still king of the world, the cool guy is in the White House, and Kelly can't comprehend the rest of the world not clamoring for these shores. I just hope you see your own potential, she continues. If you remain in Pakistan, I'll always worry about your safety. Again, it's 2011, and Americans are worried about everyone else's safety. sated in the knowledge that their nook of the world is far safer than elsewhere, although don't tell them why that might be. History is what happens in other places. America transcends it. This will all change, but at the time I can merely nod. Leaving home isn't easy, I say, offering my own banality in response to hers. And you've already done it at such a young age, she replies, upbeat, as we take the Eugene exit. Mark my words, you'll be back in no time. My mother tells me that the first time she returned to Hamburg, she cried every morning for California. Did you ever ask her how many times she's cried for Hamburg? Callie sighs. I am so bloody difficult. She is much happier here. I pinch back my tongue and change the subject to the honeymoon. Callie and Ethan are leaving for Hawaii next week. But I don't buy it, that thing she says about her mother. Of course, one can be happy anywhere. Certain zip codes help, and yet none are necessary. But it is Callie's certainty that irks me. Her mother must have done what many immigrants do. Create neat narratives for their children, flimsy accounts of one-way movement they then begin to internalize. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. And perhaps these accounts are not lies, but simply omissions that elide over how home is forever that other place. The first one to drive you to despair, the lover you took before learning to externalize the deeds of the world. It is the sole landscape of dreams, the only place that will ever convince you that its failings, its bounties, its excesses and caresses are all your own. After all, where does it end and you begin? I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. It's so special to be here with you today, Dure. Like, I feel like the first time I heard you mention this book was maybe, correct me if I'm wrong about this, your first semester here as a student, when you had already kind of, I think you had mostly like a finished first draft at that point, right?
Yeah,
and we're already kind
a
of
very, very, very bad first draft.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that. But if you feel comfortable talking about it, but I just want to say first, congratulations. Like, you're how many days out from pub now? Just a few. Right?
Yeah, a week and a half. Yeah.
And you've gotten glowing rave reviews in The Guardian. You have a star from Kirkus. The book is all over the place. So I hope it feels really exciting to come back here, and it's really an honor to celebrate with you tonight. But yeah, so let's go back to that like really, really early draft, since I know there are a lot of writers in the room who are probably eager to someday be talking about their debut novel. And I think it's kind of an interesting story to come to your MFA program with a book drafted and kind of a vision for what you want to do next with it. And I'm hoping you might be comfortable talking a little bit about how it changed along the way, like how being here informed the book, the choices that you made to workshop it or not, and how your thinking maybe in grad school like affected what the book became. Is that too?
Yeah,
that's a big question.
No. Is there? I feel like there's a slight echo.
It does feel like we're talking in like a cave or something, but it's a small room.
But I think yours is better. I feel it more with me. I don't know if that's just because it's me. Oh, really? Oh, never mind. Okay, maybe it's better now.
Oh,
thank you.
I thought those were like fancy mics with no
They are very fancy waters. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you very much. It sounds a little better to me now, at least. Okay. What I was gonna say is that it's sometimes like, I mean, it's a shame that obviously there's one name that always comes on the cover of the book, which is the author's, but I feel like there could have been an alternate version of this talk where Peter and Carl and people who were in that very first workshop with me talked about how like they thought it had changed, because I feel like so many things changed between then and now. And to be fair, I think I remember just going into my very first workshop with like half an entire novel, which was just a crazy thing for me to do at the time, and like thinking back now. But and I was very convinced that it was very good. And the thing is, I think, I mean, I don't know if like people just let me go easy, or I don't remember it feeling like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't
Yeah.
remember feeling shattered after leaving the workshop. So everyone was kind enough to me, and I'm sure there were things in there that were working. The biggest thing that to me, I realized later on that wasn't working is, and I'm sure like you must have gone back and forth with Marlena as
Yeah.
well, which is a coming of age story, which was that it was, in the initial drafts, it was told very much from the
Yeah,
perspective of only young Hira.
Yeah.
So now there's, and maybe people have even sensed it from like the,
Yeah.
you know, the short passage that I read, but now the narrator is this unplaced older Hira. You never really get to know where she is and what she's doing in life now, or where, you know, or what prompted this entire sort of storytelling. But you do know that there's a perspective that's older and wiser.
Yeah, you can kind of feel it sort of like accordioning outward or something,
Right.
in this sense of like, okay, I'm looking back, I have some distance from this, like this is what this means now. Like she can add that in. I'm really interested in that. I think we've even talked about that a little bit before, right? Like there's craft considerations and sort of complexity things that come along with that when you're thinking about writing fiction, but there's also like publishing considerations that come along with that choice, I think, that are hard to talk about too. Like if you're writing a first-person narrator really close to the action of their 16th year of life, a lot of people want to talk about that as a YA novel, and if you add some retrospective distance, then it can be maybe more adult. I guess I'm curious to dig into that choice a little bit more. Like, did you feel that people were sort of categorizing the book in one way and you were like, actually it's something else and I need to add this distance in the POV to like really get at the thing I'm trying to say? How did that choice sort of like open the book up for you in different ways?
Yeah. So in terms of the publishing side of things, there definitely was, especially with the earlier drafts, there was a desire to push it towards YA by certain people, and then but the thing is, like, these things are obviously so arbitrary because there were certain editors that were like, "There's no way this is YA," and then there were some that were like, "No, like we can't imagine selling it as anything but YA." And so, one, these things are just extremely arbitrary, but I do, and maybe it's one of those things that once you've made a decision, you like kind of have to justify it as well. But I do think that the book is richer for having had that additional perspective, because I think, and of course there are people who've done it brilliantly, but it's very, very hard to pull off a young person because they're just simultaneously so smart and so stupid, and they like a lot of the things that Hera was saying in the initial drafts they were things that would have felt very smart to her, but felt very naive to like an older reader, even including myself when I look back at those drafts now. So I think there were there were multiple pressures, and perhaps there was a pressure of publishing as well, but I do think that the book ended up being better for that choice.
Yeah, it's interesting when kind of looking at it again and in preparation for our talk, sometimes you hit these moments of like reflection or insight that feel so rich and like vibrational with all of the life here has lived, even the life that we haven't seen, that's just we understand has like sort of informed the story. And I'm thinking of the passage actually in what you read is a great example, because people have heard that one about home and place, and then there's another one later that, watch me, I try to write the notes and then read the notes. I'm like, who could read this note? This is not the book about America. This is not the kind of story. I'm not going to find the quote. I'm sorry, you all. Or I could, but it would take too long. But those moments, right, create like so much possibility for character and for sort of like the takeaways of the story. So were those kind of layered in? I guess they were sort of layered in later, or like twerked to fit this newer, richer hero voice?
A lot of them were added on later, and that's also been one of the fascinating things about having the book out, which is that almost now in the era of screenshots, like friends send you like passages that they really loved, and almost none of them were in the first draft.
That's amazing.
So I mean, which is why people spend years and years on books, right? That like most often the books are better for it.
Doesn't that feel validating though a little bit? Like, I mean, it must also feel like, oh shit, well I'm glad like I didn't go in this way forward, but like right? I mean, you had to do a lot of work to come to those places, and you had to really understand the character in order to get there. So, but to kind of pull back a little bit from the really crafty stuff, though I do have a lot of questions about that given our audience, I want to ask something maybe a little bit more personal about the book. I think that you did a year-long exchange program yourself when you were a teenager, also in Oregon, right? And I, as a writer who writes things that are semi-close to my life sometimes, feel really resentful of questions about the relationship between life and fiction, because fiction is fiction and everyone should just leave people alone. That said, I'm going to ask you about it anyway. And I'm really curious kind of about like what that alchemy looks like for you. I think it's personal and different for every writer, and I wonder, to the extent you feel comfortable sharing, like why you return to that sort of scenario and what it felt like to kind of plumb that for a novel, having gone through some elements of the experience in your life.
Yeah, so I did do a very similar exchange program. The years are different. Hira goes in 2010 and 11, and I went 2008, so a few years apart. And then a lot of the characters, once she's in Oregon, a lot of the characters that she meets, the host family, they're like, all of that is very different from how it was with me. But I think a big reason for why from the beginning, and I knew that like this is something that happens, and I very much just leaned into it, partly because I come from, the American Fever was the first fiction project that I ever worked on. Before that, I'd only ever done personal essays. So I feel like my training is already to be comfortable talking about myself, and like how that self relates to the world. And so I can imagine it being, I can imagine it being far less comfortable for someone who is not, because it can be a personality thing. It can also be just like, are you used to it, sort of thing. And then the reason why I chose that experience was because a very weird experience, but also because it was a very discrete thing that happened in my life. It was very much like a year-long program. And then I started the novel in 2018, so it had been 10 years from when I went to Oregon. And so I felt like there had been enough time for it to have congealed and to be like turned into fiction. Although I don't know if there's other people who experience this, but I did frequently have in the initial drafts this moment of like, wait, no, that's not how it happened. And then you have to remind yourself that it really doesn't matter whether it happened or not.
That's interesting though, that you did feel a kind of like tug from real life to like a sort of corrective impulse to be like, oh no, the truth is this.
Right.
It's funny, I sometimes feel like the opposite, but get in trouble for that. Like, it's like, I'm like, let's make it all up. And then people will be like, that's not how it happened. It's interesting how the brain like wants to correct for fiction, kind of, even when you're writing fiction. So another sort of bigger picture question I have about the book is about the structure, actually. I think one of my favorite things about this novel is how much suspense you sort of gain from kind of rooting us in the fact that here it's sick and we know it and it's happening. We have this like dramatic event that we're racing towards, but then we jump back to Pakistan and we're rooted there in the kind of going to Oregon sort of build up, which feels like a narratively brave decision to me. I think a lot of times the advice we get in workshop or from editors and agents or whatever is like start the story at max drama, which you do a little bit, but then totally subvert in different ways. So I'm curious about that, and if that kind of was always how you felt the story needed to be, and maybe even a little bit about why, if it is, was always sort of you were certain about it. Like, is there a thematic reason? Or?
So in initial drafts, the story started without any of that sort of prologue-y business in Pakistan, and when we. I don't know if it was not when we went out for submissions, but between like when I was sort of like still looking around for agents, some of the feedback I got was that it felt like a pretty slow start. There was also feedback that the story should start in America because that's where the story begins, which I thankfully ignored. But I did feel like there was something to that
Yeah.
You know, because it's like the first few chapters, they're set in Pakistan, so they mean a lot to the story overall,
Yeah.
but there isn't a lot that like happens in terms
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
any kind of like plot momentum. And so I did feel like there needed to be, because what I was trying to do initially was leave that disease be this like big, like, you know, moment of drama
Yeah.
towards the
Yeah.
latter half of the book, around like the 75%
Like a
mark
kind
or
of,
whatever.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem, and it's, I don't think it's much of a spoiler because it's told
Yeah.
pretty early on. The disease is tuberculosis, and if people know anything about the disease, it's very contagious. So what you do when you get it is you quarantine and you just like sit in a room alone for weeks and weeks and weeks. So that's not very dramatic. And so it wasn't really working as
Yeah.
that. And so I decided that like a more productive way
Yeah.
to use it was to just dangle it at the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that, like, that sort of way of thinking of the solution, right? It's like sometimes getting feedback, the easiest, the like most straightforward way of solving it isn't actually the answer.
Right.
You have to correct for what you're trying to do, so you have to like mold it to fit something else.
Yeah.
And I think like moving that piece to the beginning, but just the piece was
Yeah.
such an elegant kind of way to create momentum and to give us the sort of texture and richness that we need to understand what this move means for Hira and how transformative it's going to be for her. There's another, I think, in one of those sort of like beautiful aboutness lines that maybe came in when you were shading in Hira's sort of retrospective voice, which I'm also going to mangle. Dre, I'm so sorry. I really did write the quotes down, but
Don't worry about it.
I actually didn't write this one down. Is about she mentions that this is a book or a story about parenting and adolescence, and this is another kind of like, it's about a lot of things, but that's one of the sort of asides she says when she's thinking about what the book means, or what she's saying. And that you don't have to answer this. You can totally like be like, no, next question. But having become a mother myself in the process of writing a book, where I wasn't a mother when I started it, and then I am one now, and it's totally messed with my head in a lot of different ways. Is that also, you had not become a mother when you started this book and became one probably in the revision process? Is that timeline right?
Yeah. So there's actually, and this sort of ties to the narrator and like
Yeah.
the positioning of the narrator herself, not because one of the things that there were a few lines in there that actually more directly alluded to
Yeah.
the like Hira herself being
Yeah.
a mother, that we actually ended up taking out because
interesting.
I mean, I'm actually, I would love to know what you think about this, because I know that in Marlena there's, you have the narrator, the older narrator is very much placed.
Yeah,
and
I, like,
you know
fixed
where
it.
she
Yeah.
is and what she's doing. But I think that because I hadn't placed her giving
Yeah.
any kind of very specific tantalizing details
Yeah, that
about
makes
her
sense.
was almost too
Distracting.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
like I wonder if like, I mean, did you have to make that decision too of how much to put her in, or?
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I think it's funny how you talk about your revision process. I felt it was a sort of spectrum, right? Like I started really close to the action of the young characters, and then as I did successive drafts, I moved farther and farther away, and then I felt like I hit a max saturation point of info and was like, this is now distracting.
Yeah.
You need to tell the reader something about where she is. So I like tipped over,
Got it,
and I
got
think
it,
you
got
stayed
it,
in a
yeah.
different space. But the question, which again you can bypass, but I'm personally, maybe we can talk about it after. It's just, do you feel like, how did that change? Did that experience in your life sort of like change how you had to think about this book, or change how you thought about Hira's relationship to this story in any way? Or like, did it influence your revision process, or were you just kind of like, I'm already so firmly grounded in the world of this book that like, it's not?
Yeah. I mean, maybe if anything, I became very generous towards the mother in the story. It's like she's always right, even when she's you know messing up. She's right. I think there are certain instances of the mother, because a lot of the book is about her relationship with her mother, where I think I like hopefully try to add more nuance from it. But again, I think I tried to tread very carefully there, because as you said, like I didn't approach the tipping point, and I decided to stay on this side, and there was a lot of there were like frequently decisions about how wise and knowing to make her. There's because it's actually really funny because there's a line from the passage that I read that is like, oh, this will all change, like America's position in the world, and it's funny because even that feels a little dated now because I wrote this during the pandemic when like it was just like, okay, we're down the shitter, like this is this is it for America. And I don't know, I mean it probably isn't, but
true still.
so it but yeah, so there was an impulse frequently to make her just keep her as updated as possible, but then at some point that like you know it had to stop, and I had to choose like
that makes sense.
She can't get any wiser, and she can't be like too knowing, and
right. I sort of have to like shut the door on what this book can do, so that I can do like other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's wise. I guess another question. I feel like I have so many different questions, but what you brought up circled something about Hera's voice also that I think is really so specific and where so much of the energy of this book comes from for me, and that is her particular spiky. She's just like doesn't take a lot of. I feel like it's not like NPR. I'm like, can I say shit in here? She doesn't take a lot of shit. She like is pretty direct about her thoughts and feelings. She's got that like wonderful, addictive sort of teenage judginess that's so precise and spot on. Like she notices like a lean man with manufactured teeth, I think she says about a doctor at one point, or Kelly's smells like a chemist's idea of a peach. She's just like brutal. And I'm curious about that line, because I think this came up maybe in times we've talked about the book, but like, did you get any pressure to sort of soften her edges, or have you felt that has that kind of feedback come up? Like, I suppose what I'm circling is an annoying question about an unlikable female narrator, particularly a teenager. And then I'm also kind of thinking of that line where when she's on her way, Abu says, you know, you have to be a Muslim Pakistani and a girl. And she's like, well, that's too many. That's so much harder because I also have to be a girl. Right. And I guess I'm curious about all of that, if that's a big, naughty question, but I think
no. And again, like I'm sure you felt a lot of this as well with Marlena, where there definitely is. I do think that a lot of any reader who's very smart realizes that obviously people are generally not very likable, and teenagers especially so. And so there were certain times when, and I think I remember, because part of this was also workshopped in your class, and there were questions of like, oh, should Hera be, you know, softened a little bit? And I think like the consensus from obviously all the very smart readers in your class was like, no, that's but having said that, I know that, and of course that's the age thing, right? Where like a lot of the things that Hera says in this book, like a younger Hera or an older Hera would not. And so it's not, like you are, by choosing a teenager, you are allowing them to be angrier and in ways that are like obviously extremely unprotective a lot of the times. But also it is also fun to have a teenager because you can allow them to say things that you cannot.
It has a little bit of that sort of like, I think that's part of where so much of the energy comes from, where you're like, I get to be privy to these thoughts, and it's like really fun to be there and have that sort of space, be in that interior space with her. I'm curious, like, are you the kind of writer who reads a lot sort of when you're trying to put a novel together? I know some people like to abstain from any influence. And if you are the kind of reader who sort of likes to take stuff in to help guide you, were there things that you were looking at or texts where you were like, okay, I can see a way forward because of this, or sort of books you felt like you were in conversation with? I find it so funny when people don't want influence. It's like, come on, be grateful anyone's there to guide you through this hell. I think the one thing that I tried not to read too much of was specifically the coming of age or the coming to America genre, because
Obviously, there's
Yeah.
so much great stuff in there, but there was just like it felt too close to the themes. But what is funny is that right after I think I'd like finished the draft or submitted it or something, I read Brooklyn by Colin Toybeen, which if people haven't read, it's fantastic. The movie's also good, but obviously, as always, not as good. And what was fascinating about that was that I picked it up not, even though it is a like coming to America story as well, but because it's like very much a period book. It's set in the 50s and it's about an Irish woman coming here. I definitely did not pick it up thinking that it would have anything similar to American Fever, and it totally did. Like a lot of the questions that book asks, much more elegantly, obviously, because it's Toybeen, but are like things that I've been trying to work through with American Fever. Yeah,
that's cool. And so it's so exciting. I feel like when you find that in the world, and you're like, okay, it's not as lonely here as I thought it was, or I don't know, just the sort of feeling of being like together with someone else's mind.
Especially when like there's such a huge, it's like, you know, like, I mean, universality has now become a cliche, but like there are some things that it was about a woman coming to Brooklyn in the 50s, and she, like a lot of the feelings that she was feeling were things that here had felt. So
I wonder, again, knowing that there are a lot of MFA students in the room, if you might be comfortable sharing anything about like sort of, so there's this story, right, that we've already talked about of like writing the draft and kind of thinking about it, and really, it sounds like kind of really having to wrestle with sort of POV questions about like point of telling and how to get this story across. But then of course there's the whole other story of how a book comes to be, which is the story of publishing, and usually that's a story full of bullshit and pain. But I'm curious if you feel like sharing with your colleagues anything about that journey, what that was like for you to kind of go through all the things that have to happen in order for the book to become a hardcover that we can buy and sign and talk about, and maybe how it feels now that it's like actually here, which is usually the part that redeems all the other stuff.
Yeah.
I can focus it if you want, like agents or publishing.
No, I mean, the only thing I can say is like, writers are amazing and publishing sucks. And what I'm trying to say with that is that like the experience of publishing this novel, and thank God it came about and it's happened now, but it was a very long, arduous journey to get it published, especially in the US. It had a much easier time in the UK. It went like within a week of going out there, but in the US it was just like on submissions for a very, very, very long time. At some point my agent decided it was a good idea to send me every single rejection email.
I think
so like, and he's British, so I'd wake up, there was like the time difference, so I'd like wake up at like 6 in the morning to just like sleuth.
Couldn't he just put them in like one digest, like once a week, like a newsletter? Like so
Morning brew, no, but the sort of like the great thing has been that once it's come out, it's been so wonderful, obviously, just to like talk to people, but specifically the thing that I'm saying about writers being amazing is that I've had such a, like, the fact that I like get to sit here with you, or like a couple of days ago I had a talk with Jamil Jankochai. I don't know if people know of his work. He's brilliant. And like people who I read and sort of deified as like these like amazing writers, and then I like just, you know, sent him an Instagram message like, oh, do you want to get on a Zoom call with me? And he's like, okay. And it's wild that you can achieve that, and you can like just talk to all these people, even with, you know, even being so fresh. But I don't know. So that's been really wonderful. Yeah.
It's funny, like this idea, right? Like that there's like, I think this starts to break down a little bit after the book comes out, like that there's like this wall, and on one side are people who haven't published a book, and on the other side are like the writers, but actually everyone is the same. Like it's all, I mean, it's not, of course, there's a lot of of different sort of privileges and things that come along with the horror that is publishing, but like the feelings of it all are the same or something. Like nothing really fundamentally changes when you get to the other side, except that this thing happens. So I guess I'll ask one more question, and I want to make sure we have time for people in the audience to ask questions. So think of your question now. I guess I want to know what you're working on at the moment, if you feel like sharing, or also if you're superstitious about it, you don't have to. But I guess what's next? Are you working on a novel of stories? You have so many stories, I know.
Yeah, so I don't know if you felt this way after Marlena, but I am very tired of hearing my own voice, and I just really want to go and like read other people's, and because I had started and I was like tentatively working on a second novel set in the 80s and 90s in Pakistan, but I think like having been through this, I just like I feel like I need to go like replenish my brain.
I think it's nice that you said that. I think there's like so much pressure on writers to like do things right away, or even from their publishers, like the follow-up being, I don't know, like following on the tails of the book, and this is like a road that you travel in this direction, and these are the steps along the way. But if you don't put stuff in,
exactly,
nothing's coming out.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a stupid. Any questions? Surely someone has a question. I'll give you. Oh, there's Carl.
Who was your favorite part to write?
That's a good question. There's a chapter in there that's set in New York, like a full chapter that's set only in New York, and I had a lot of fun writing that because I think it was one of those things where I was not in New York when I was writing it, so I was able to almost like go down memory lane, and because the hit I was visiting New York, and that allowed me to just like make her go to every single favorite spot of mine in the city.
For New York.
Exactly. It was like a virtual tour of New York for me, so yeah, that was fun. Yes.
How did you weave in the retrospective narrator? Was it kind of picking your spots, or did you go back to the beginning and comb it through from the beginning?
Yeah, it had to be done, like, or at least for me, like I had to go from the very start, because the thing with doing that is like when you Control F and like add things, it can just like mess everything up. So if I did it ad hoc, it might have like negated something that, you know, and that still happened a couple of times, and then the editors had to come in because I would put something in and that would like negate something. And the thing is, obviously people are always sort of negating themselves and saying things, but it doesn't really work that well in narrative, especially when you're saying two very opposite things like pages apart. So it had to be done like fully, yeah.
And did you work from a new document or a previous draft?
I love that question because I feel like that's such a, you clearly are going through something similar. Did I work in a different, I think because there were certain sections that I knew needed more work, and for those I worked from the beginning, and then once I was in chapters where I knew not a lot was going to change, I like copy pasted it. But yeah, good luck.
I hope this is not an annoying question, but knowing you started writing this in 2018, and this is like a novel that deals with like sickness and eventually quarantine, like I wonder if like it became easier or more difficult to like work on this book / like sell this book once like 2020 and things like that. Like I wonder how you were navigating that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I was editing in March 2020, and it was extremely surreal to be writing about quarantine. It clearly did not help sell the book, if that is a curiosity of anyone. And what's actually really funny is that like after you sell the book, they're like your agent tries to see if like anyone's interested in film rights or whatever, and they emailed me a few days ago being like, actually this is having a very hard time because no one really wants to talk about quarantine anymore. It just feels like people are trying to move past that, and so yeah. But yeah, it was very surreal to write it at that time.
Did you think about like an imagined audience while you were writing this, and do you find that concept to be useful or just counterproductive?
Yeah, that's a really smart question. I don't know. I mean, the easiest answer is no. Even when I know that that's not, because everyone has an imagined reader, even if that's your mother or your sibling or your best friend. I think that I guess the only thing that I would add to that is because I was born and raised in Pakistan, and I spent a lot of my formative, and I started writing while I was still there for a lot of, and it was all in English. It wasn't in Urdu, but it was for a local audience, and so that made me aware from a very early stage of this audience that existed for my work outside of the Anglosphere. And that doesn't mean that I'm trying to alienate anyone else. It just means that I can see an audience outside of what is typically considered to be the audience when you're publishing in the US. Yeah. Yes.
I haven't finished reading yet, but one thing I've noticed, in the first 50 pages, which I read it all in one sitting when my book came yesterday, was that because you have the retrospective narrator, you get to comment on immigrant stories or the trope of the immigrant novel. I really love that meta fictional strand. And I guess I'm curious if that was always part of your project from the beginning, to sort of be almost critical of that, not of the writers, but the way that genre is talked about, or if that's something that came in later as part of their story.
Yeah. So I know that one of the reasons why I was particularly interested in Hira's story was because she was, to me, she feels like this sort of space that's neither here nor there, because she's not coming here to immigrate, but she has still left, so she's not like people back home either. And I thought that was my way of sort of adding something sort of new to what is clearly, and it's a huge canon of fantastic books, like the classic, Immigrant Comes to America story. And then some of those reflections were they were added later on. I don't know if I was referring as much to writings about it, but I guess, it's very hard to differentiate those two when you're a writer yourself. But yeah, I guess I was talking about narratives at large, but yeah, with writing as well. Yeah, I feel like a lot of those things were added later on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, Urvi, your question made me think of how the book, it has this feeling of Hira sort of knowing that she's writing a book. She never says I am a writer, but she's thinking about narrative. There's a part at some point kind of near the end where she thinks about what would happen in a novel, and then she says, but in life there are just silences and
yeah, I 100% thought that was going to be taken out when it went to edits, because I was like, this is it felt like something I really, really wanted to do, and then part of it felt gimmicky, but it is a novel, but but the person who's telling it doesn't think of it as a novel. But it's so hard, right, with something in first person, because if you really want your narrator to feel true, right. You're up against this sticky problem of we all know this is a book. So you just let her speak into that, and as she speaks into it, there's no way to leave this book not believing in her and just her fullness on the page. I think that's part of it. We get the sense that there's no bullshit ever. She's I know this is a book, this is a book. We're all doing this. We have time for, I think, one more question before we need to go to signing. You had it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could talk more about your revision process, right after that initial first draft, if it was sort of I don't know, if there was a total reconstruction, you start one again, or bits and pieces or chunks of the novel, sort of how you went about it.
Yeah. So I think that once I got once I realized that there was a lot that had to be changed, I just closed the document and went away for several months, and then had to sort of just gather up because I knew that it was going to need a lot of work, and then I think, like as I said, some of the things were done within the draft as it existed before, and most of it was done by like printing out the entire document and then rewriting it while like simultaneously making the edits. And yeah, and then of course like the process keeps continuing even after, obviously, like once you send it to an agent and then you send it to editors, and then the editors make changes, and sometimes you don't like those changes. And yeah, a lot of like even when I read, I don't know if you ever felt this when you did your readings, but like I feel impulses to like change sentences or like, and then I don't do it because I can sometimes see people have their book open.
I just do it. I just did it. The whole first chapter of Marlena, which I still read, is like full of edits.
Oh.
It's like, sorry, it's just better that way.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
not a good idea.
yeah.
You're smarter. That's better. I guess we have like time for one. Yeah.
So you guys were talking about how in this day and age it's really cool to take pictures of screenshots of little passages. So I realized that I did that the first time that I was reading it. It's a really cool line that I can just, it says, defending dysfunctionality as character is a singularly adult trait. And that's a really cool line to end a little passage on. It wasn't the end of a chapter, but the end of the passage. So I'm wondering, did you have this line in mind and then you created like a I don't know, a way to get to this line? Or did you
Just really wanted to say something. Yeah.
what you were trying to think of, and this came naturally at the end, like a concluding thought in your head? Or not just this specifically, but like there's plenty of lines like this that end like sections within the book.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because I think it's like such a, because yeah, I think a lot of the book tries to be like aphoristic with, you know, certain lines, and but I love that question because it makes me think back to what the process was. And I don't really know the answer. I think it's probably a mix of both. There are certain things that like I wanted to put in Hira's words, and then I had to like find my way around them. But sometimes you know that like, okay, you gotta end the paragraph, and it's, you know, what's the best way to do it. That's how, yeah, that's a great question.
All right, well, I want to make sure we have time for everyone to get their book signed. And I think you can also buy them if you have not yet bought your copy, which you should do immediately. Thank you so much, Dory. It was really
Thank
enjoyable.
you. Thank you so much.